When we're talking about the development of an athlete, but also with regards to the training of our elite athletes. Coordination, in a simple way, just describes coordinative abilities, and I think you all heard about them. Things like coordination between your hands and your legs, for example. Reaction is a part of coordination. We have rhythm, we have balance, we have hand-eye coordination. We have the ability to differentiate certain movements, for example, when you're catching a ball or balls of different weights. So these are all coordinative. Have a deep of motor skills or coordination, you will be able to reach a certain technical level. And with a good motor skill base, it will also mean that you're able, or your athletes are able, to learn new techniques in a slightly easier and quicker way. So we've already discussed the different aspects about athletes' development, and I want you to keep that in mind. We have the conditioning and the physical aspects. We have, of course, the psychosocial aspects, like the mental development of an athlete, the emotional development. Yeah, we described it as physical literacy as well. And we have the motor skill development. And again, motor skills and technique are highly interdependent, especially when we're talking about the development from a rough technical model, for example, something you introduce with beginners, throughout a basic model towards the advanced model, which has been used by world-class athletes. Yeah, so the motor skill development among these three deserves a special consideration, because you will see later that it actually enables you to make use of your strength and conditioning. You can be very powerful, but if you don't have the necessary motor skills, if you don't have a decent technical level, it will be very hard for you to apply your strengths, your power, doing a running, jumping, or throwing movement. Yeah, when we're talking about the long-term athletes development, again, we have to differentiate between identifying and developing talents and the training of a high-performance athletes. Jews and junior athletes are not miniature adults. You cannot simply take the training programs of the fastest athletes in the world and apply it to a 15 or 16-year-old kid, for example. These young and developing athletes, they have special requirements, special demands, which we have to cover in our daily training sessions. It's about developing a young talent or young athletes in general. We need to ensure that we're working on the fundamentals, and coordination in this aspect deserves a high priority, because it will diminish or limit the later performance level of your athlete. And we need to work on the fundamentals, and you've seen this already, considering all biomotor abilities. So speed, strength, endurance, flexibility, and motor skills or coordination. And you're not supposed to neglect any of these, especially not with the young athletes. Once you're dealing with more senior athletes, high performance athletes in the specialization or performance stage, that means after the age of 18, 19, we're probably emphasizing on one or two of these biomotor abilities. Yeah, like a sprinter, of course, throughout his career, the training is getting more specific. They're training more speed, or they're conducting more strength sessions, but they still have to cover the other aspects as well. Yeah, like endurance is even important for a sprinter or jumper, because it helps you with the recovery. Flexibility, of course, is necessary to ensure you have a proper range of movement. And the motor skills, again, are necessary to apply your strengths and to ensure that your athletes are able to reach a very high technical competency. So if you're combining strength training with coordination, it equals speed or power. We have already mentioned that you need to address speed throughout the year in your training program. But it does not necessarily mean that you have to do or conduct maximum running velocity sessions everywhere throughout the year. Yeah, you don't have to necessarily go all out if you're doing speed work in the general preparation phase. If you use the right coordinative abilities or the right technical drills, and you combine them with strength training, that can actually substitute a speed session to a certain extent. And we know that if you're combining maximum strength training and maximum speed training at the same time, your athletes will be dealing with a huge risk of injuries. So we can reduce this potential injuries or injury risk by combining strength training with coordination and technique instead. And within the following minutes, I will share a few examples with you how to do that. So always keep in mind, develop the strength of your athletes, because we've already realized that acceleration equals force divided by mass. So we need to maintain our body mass, but we need to increase the strength. And if we increase the strength training of an athlete, if you combine it with some coordination and technique work, our athletes will definitely get faster. And that's the same for all events, whether we're talking about a sprinter, a distance runner, a thrower, or a jumper. And always keep it in mind, quality is more important than quantity, and less sometimes is more. So also when you see the exercises following in the next slides, always ensure that your athletes are focusing on the high quality execution of these exercises. So talking about these coordinative abilities, these abilities only come into effect if you combine them with the other motor skills, what I mentioned earlier already. Yeah, your strength alone does not really support your performance level. But if you combine strength and coordination, as you can see Anurani doing some balance work here on a slackline, for example, if you combine strength and coordination, it will directly make your strength training more efficient, because the athlete or the athlete's body is better capable of applying the strengths. They create a higher sensitivity and a better understanding of the movement. Yeah, we have a precise motor control, which ensures a likewise efficient and economic movement. And that's of particular interest, not only for the sprinters or jumpers or throwers, but also for the middle and long distance runners. Because we know that a marathon runner, for example, is doing more than 25,000 steps during a marathon. If you are able, because of a better coordination, to increase the efficiency or the economical aspects of every single step during this marathon, your athletes might be able to save a lot of energy, which of course will help you to improve the timings. And another important aspect by enhancing the coordinative abilities is that similar movements will be executed in a faster way or with lesser force production. So you can actually save some energy, which will be important for the middle and long distances, or you can execute your movement, for example, your javelin throw, your shot put, your takeoff in the long jump in a faster way, just because the way your muscles are working together with each other, or the muscles are corresponding with the brain, is improved. So keep in mind that coordination determines the quality of your physical skills. And in India, I'm pretty sure you've realized that you're facing a situation that the physical aspects, the strength and conditioning, often have a higher importance for the coaches in comparison to the coordinative abilities, the motor skills, or the technical aspects. And that's something we have to avoid. We need to develop the motor skills first, and afterwards technical and physical aspects have to be enhanced alongside each other. I'm pretty sure you know this man, Abraham Lincoln, former president of the United States. And he was quoted saying that, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe." And what he was about to say is that it's about improving the quality of the tools you're using. In his way, it was the axe. So he was sharpening the axe to make the process of chopping down a tree a bit easier and faster. And that's exactly what we have to do in our training process as well. We have to sharpen our tools. And tools in this way are our motor skills in combination, because they're directly influencing them, in combination with the technical aspects. Yeah, technique and motor skills become actually a multiplier of your strengths if you're addressing them in a correct way. If you're neglecting technique work and motor skill work, it's very unlikely that your athlete will be fully able to utilize his physical power, his physical strengths. So only if you're developing technique and motor skills alongside the muscles, the physical aspects, you will be able to make full use of your athlete's potential. So look for the right tools and find a way to strengthen not only the body, but also the coordination. So here I want to give you a few simple examples for coordination training. And when we are addressing coordination in training, we're always following the major training principles. And these are from simple to complex. Yeah, we start with very basic exercises, and that you will see within these 4 videos. We start from very simple exercise, and it's getting more and more intense. So from simple to complex. Another principle is that we always start with slow movements. And once the athletes are able to execute this slow movement in a proper and a correct way, is slowly increasing the speed. So from slow to fast. And we're addressing technique or motor skills, we're also following the principle from known to unknown exercises. So you start or you begin with exercises the athlete has already experienced in the past. And again, once they're able to perform well, you're slowly including elements of unknown exercises, yeah, aspects they don't know. And last not least, we're following this principle from general to specific. So we're starting with very general basic exercises, which probably don't even have a lot to do with our main event group. But step by step throughout the season, within a session, we're making them more specific. Yeah, so simple to complex, slow to fast, known to unknown, and general to specific. Keep these principles in mind. They're not only applicable to the development of motor skills, but when it comes to all the biomotor abilities at all. So I will start the first video now. I hope that the quality is more or less okay. We've been facing some problems by playing videos on the Zoom software, but I think it's the best way. So you can see that the athlete is performing very simple skips throughout these cones. Yeah, the task for him was always to conduct or to have 2 steps in between. The hands are fixed at the hip. And as coaches Rajmohan and Nagesh introduced it on Tuesday, yeah, we have, of course, vertical alignment. We have a neutral pelvis position. The toes are looking up, and we have a very active hip extension. So whilst conducting these coordinated drills, we also have to ensure that the basic technical aspects are going to be maintained. Much more. So we're going ahead now with the next exercise. It's the same exercise, but now the athlete is asked to clap his hands behind and in front of his body. Yeah, we're having a very simple leg exercise, but now we're adding an arm movement, which makes the whole movement a bit more complex, so a bit harder for the athlete to perform this exercise or to execute it. And then the next step, now the athlete is clapping on top and below at his sides. Yeah, so very simple again, but you can already see the vertical movement of his arms makes it a bit harder to maintain a proper posture. So step by step, we're increasing the complexity of the exercise, making it more difficult for the athlete to perform. And that's one of the major principles of motor skill training when we're approaching the coordinative abilities. We have to increase the complexity of the exercise, and we have to get the athletes out of their comfort zone. And then the next level, we're trying to combine the arm movement with the leg movement, but now the arms are circling clockwise around the shoulders, and the athlete is clapping on top, behind, at the thighs, and in front. Yeah, and I can just encourage you to try these exercises with your athletes. once they are back on the track. And you will see that it's relatively easy for most athletes to perform or to conduct the first exercise. Even the second and the third one are usually not causing a lot of troubles for the athletes. But if you conduct this last exercise here, clapping clockwise in the correct order, you will see that your athletes, or most of your athletes, will face tremendous difficulties. So we use this exercise, for example, in a talent identification in Germany, to test the coordinative strengths of the young kids. And out of 10,000 athletes we've tested, approximately 2% were able to conduct this exercise in a correct way at the first time, during the first trial. So one very interesting aspect about this kind of motor skill training, especially when we're combining them with technical aspects, and the hip extension, these drills here, are a technical aspect, which is essential, especially for the sprinters, jumpers, and runners. One major advantage is that we can also identify strengths and weaknesses of our athletes. Is the athlete able to maintain a proper posture? Do we have a dorsiflexion? Do we have a full hip extension? And if you conduct these exercises with your athletes, you will see that most of them at the beginning will not be able to maintain a proper posture. By focusing on the arms, out of the sudden, the hip will not be extended, maybe the toes are pointing down. So that means if we are shifting the focus away from the legs, focusing on the arms, we can actually realize or identify as coaches whether the athlete has internalized the leg movement. And that's what we as coaches are looking for, internalized movements. Because only if the athlete has internalized the correct leg movement, in this case, for example, we can be assured that they will be able to apply it in a stressful situation like a competition. So the focus is shifting away from the legs. The athlete has to think more about the arms. And by doing so, we hope that the leg movement is automized already. If it's not automized, if the athlete still has to think about what the legs have to do, there's a very high chance that even in a stressful situation like a competition, that they will not be able to apply a proper technical model. So it's a very easy way for you as a coach to identify whether your athlete was already able to stabilize, to internalize technical adjustments you've probably approached during the last months of training. So now the question is, how do we address these coordinative abilities? What are the limiting factors? And the level of coordinative abilities depends on 5 so-called main analyzers or receptors. And as better your athlete is able to capture his environment, his surroundings, using these analyzers or receptors, as better will be his or her ability to react and to adapt to sport-specific tasks. And we have 5 of these analyzers, and I will quickly go through them. The first one is the so-called muscle tendon unit itself. You know that every muscle is attached to the bones via tendons. And we have receptors inside or alongside the muscle, as well as inside the tendon. So for example, if you're contracting your muscle, that usually means that we are stretching the tendon, because tendon and muscle are always working together with each other. So if the muscle is contracting in a concentric way, we are stretching the tendon. And there are so-called receptors in the tendon which are providing a constant feedback to the brain about the tension of this tendon. So when you're activating your muscle, the tendon will be stretched, and the tendon receptor will directly provide information back to the brain saying, okay, right now the muscle is contracting, the tendon is stretched. So your brain then, of course, wants to maintain a balance, homeostasis. So your brain provides information back to the muscle saying, okay, muscle, the tendon is stretched, it does not really like that, so please relax. That's of course in a balanced way when you're not conducting any kind of movement. At the same time, we have an analyzer alongside the muscle. And if the muscle is relaxed, this receptor in the muscle in a certain way is stretched. And it's providing exactly the same information back to the brain. So the brain immediately knows or always knows what is the current situation. Is your muscle activated? Is your tendon stretched? Or is your muscle relaxed? And is your tendon stretched? Yeah, so this muscle tendon unit is constantly providing information back to the brain. And that, by the way, is one reason why we should not conduct static stretching before or during a training session. Yeah, static stretching usually means you're holding a position for 20, 30 seconds. But interestingly, these receptors in the muscle tendon unit, they stop working after approximately 6 to 8 seconds. So if you're maintaining a static stretching position for more than 6 to 8 seconds, they are not providing any information back to the brain, and that means the tension in your muscle is reduced. And this reduced muscle tension then might cause injuries if you're going for an intensive load during the main part of your session. Yeah, so the reason we should avoid static stretching before or during a session is directly related to these receptors inside or alongside the so-called muscle tendon unit. Another receptor, of course, are the eyes. Yeah, we're looking towards a hurdle, we're looking towards a steeplechase, maybe some jumpers or throwers looking towards the top of a tree for some orientation, yeah, where to throw the implement, how to take off. So the eyes are also providing constant information to our brain, and then the brain's responsibility is to filter this information to see what is the essential information we need to improve our movement, maybe to adjust in team sports, if you see there's a competitor, if you have to conduct some cutting movements, whatever. Yeah, we also have the skin as a receptor, which probably in athletics is not as important. It might help you, for example, in the jumps or in the throws, when you have to estimate what is the amount of headwind, what is the amount of tailwind you are facing. Yeah, how do you have to adjust your run up? How do you have to adjust the release angle in the javelin throw? So the skin might help you with regards to the adjustment of the jumps and throws. But again, for the distance runners and the sprinters, usually don't have that much information which is provided by the skin. We have the ears. Yeah, and the ears, of course, in team sport, they are very important to get additional information. You might use them during a competition in the middle long distances if your coach is providing some technical advice. But again, they are also constantly providing information back to our brain. And very interestingly for athletics is a sense of balance, which of course is located inside the ear, but not regarding the acoustic information which is provided. The sense of balance helps you to stabilize. And you've seen our top female javelin thrower, Anurani, using this slack line. And it's exactly to train this sense of balance. Yeah, and interestingly, Dr. Klaus and Uwe Hohn, our javelin coaches, they have introduced this slack line approximately 1 year ago to our top javelin throwers. And I can guarantee you that even in the age of 25, 26, our athletes were still able to learn these movements, and they're doing quite well right now. So that's another important aspect, that you have to address these coordinative skills, the motor skills, throughout your life. And even a senior athlete is still able to improve such skills, which again will help him to enhance his technical knowledge. The sense of balance, again, is important for athletics, because in athletics, in most of the phases, we have a so-called single leg stance phase. When you're running, sprinting, jumping, there's only one foot on the ground. And if you only have one foot on the ground, that's directly reducing the so-called base of balance. And as smaller this base is, as harder it becomes for the body to balance itself. Yeah, if you are sitting on the ground, you might realize, okay, it's very easy to keep the balance. Because if you draw a picture of the area covered by your body parts, your body segments on the ground, it's very, very wide. If you're standing up, now it's only the feet on the ground. That means your balance is already a bit unstable. If you raise one leg, you're further decreasing the space of balance. And if you're going for your toes, or if you're going up to your toes, you again further decreasing the space of balance. And as smaller this space is, as harder it is for the body to maintain the balance. And that applies especially for dynamic movement, like sprinting, where your ground contact is only on the ball of the foot. That means a very little base of balance. And again, as smaller this base is, as harder it is for the body to balance itself, to maintain stable position. And since most of the athletics movements, also in the javelin throw or even in the shot put, until you reach the blocking phase, is only one foot on the ground. As higher the speed is, as smaller the base is, as harder it becomes for the body to maintain the balance. And that's why the training of balance becomes so crucial for our athletes. So again, these 5 receptors, the muscle tendon unit, the eyes, the skin, the ears, the sense of balance, they are continuously and constantly providing information back to our brain. And up on this information, the brain is adjusting the movement patterns. And I will try to dig a bit more into the anatomy of movement control and motor learning. So we've already learned that these receptors are providing information back to the brain via the so-called sense organs. And based on this information, an anticipation and programming of motor actions happens. Motor actions here just means movements. If you want to go for a long jump takeoff, your body has a certain idea based on experience. How does a long jump takeoff look like? How does it feel like? But then it includes all the necessary information. How is the wind? How is the balance? Did I reach the board properly? Am I overstriding a bit? Is my step a bit too short? How is the balance? Where are my arms? How is the stretching of our hamstring muscles at the instance of takeoff? So this is all information which is added to this so-called motor program, and then the brain starts to adjust this motor program, this technique. So it's not one and the same technique exactly the same time. If you are taking off 6 times in the training, you're always using the same motor program, but you might have 6 different feedbacks coming from the receptors. Because the environment will always change. Head and tailwind will always be different. Maybe the length of your run-up is adjusted slightly. Maybe the takeoff angle or the angle when you reach the takeoff board is slightly adjusted. So we have this kind of program saved in our brain, but it's always going to be adjusted. And once this happened, the brain sends an impulse to the muscles. It's innervating or activating the muscles, and that's when the action takes place. We get the information from the receptors. Our motor program is going to be adjusted, and then this adjusted motor program is shared with the muscles to activate and to execute the movement. And even during this movement, we have a constant feedback of the receptors. And of course, according to this feedback, the brain might correct or adjust the ongoing movement if necessary. Here we have another overview. So we have the analyzers or receptors, the 5 you can see on the left side. Based on this analyzers, the movement program is received and classified. So the body or the brain directly starts identifying, okay, am I going to perform a throw here? Am I going to perform a jump? And this is happening based on your experiences, because the motor program for a jump might look very different than the motor program for a throw. So if your analyzers give you the idea, okay, obviously this is a bit closer to a jump, then your brain starts looking for the jump motor program. So the classification happens here. Once this is done properly, decision-making starts. Always implementing the feedback coming from the receptors. Once a decision For the right program, the adjusted program has been done. Information is shared with the muscles through the spine, yeah, the motor cortex, and it's executed. We see the muscle action, and we have our final movement goal, the long jump. But again, in all these processes, yeah, there's constant information coming from the receptors. And therefore, it's so important that we constantly affect these receptors in our training, because they help us to improve the quality of the feedback we provide. And to share another example with you, you see Avinash Sabli here, the finalist at the World Championships in Doha 2019, where he improved his personal best and the national record in the 3,000 meter steeplechase. So we know, of course, from training, how does a clearance over a steeple look like? Yeah, he and his coach Amrich, they are training it several times, 2 sessions a week, you know, tens, dozens of clearances. So they are working on the motor program of a steeplechase clearance. So Avinash Sabel's body knows exactly, or the brain knows exactly how the motor program for a steeplechase clearance looks like. Then it comes to the competition. And of course, the body still knows how the motor program looks like, but the situation is entirely different. Because now out of the sudden, you have competitors. Yeah, that means the impact on our receptors is much higher. Yeah, the eyes, they're seeing, oh, there are more competitors. I might have to adjust my approach to the steeple. Because of this, maybe the muscle tendon unit is providing more information, because there might be some interference. People were trying to push him. Yeah, the sense of balance might be disturbed because the guy next to him here, for example, is interfering with the balance. If there's a slight contact, this might happen. Yeah, of course, ears again are probably not that important, but he might also listen to his competitors behind him, knowing that they're coming closer, so he does not have too much time. He has to leave the water pit afterwards very quickly. The skin, again, that's something you might have to avoid. Yeah, if you're feeling the contact of your fellow competitor from a different country, you might already be in trouble. But these receptors during a situation like this are always providing feedback. Yeah, and based on this feedback, you are able to slightly adjust the motor program. So the motor program, the technique we have used in training, will be adjusted, improved according to the situation. Yeah, and then afterwards, we will find a solution of how to clear the situation. And of course, here in this case, especially for his ankle, there will be a lot of skin feedback since he's running through the water. Yeah, but I hope this idea gets clear. The quality of your technique depends on the quality of the feedback of your receptors, and the quality of your receptors is something we have to constantly train. We have to improve that during our daily training sessions. And when we're talking about the anatomy of these motor skills, how motor learning in general takes place, some of you might realize or recognize these are neurons. For example, in your brain. Yeah, neurons are brain cells. And the motor programs I was talking about actually describes in a very general way, a brief way, the combination, how these different neurons are linked with each other. So if you have a motor program, it's just the electrical link between neuron number A, B, and C, for example. And if you think of these neurons as cities, yeah, I choose the Delhi, Mumbai, and Kolkata. And let's say you're living in Kolkata, and after the lockdown, you need to go to Delhi, to AFI's office. So you know the fastest way to go from Kolkata, maybe by train, would be a straight way. And you can already see that there are so-called synapses. The synapses are the connections in between these neurons. And you can see that Kolkata already has a small synapses towards Delhi. But from the Delhi side, there's not happening very much. On the other hand, you see that Delhi and Mumbai here, they have a very strong connection. And you can also see that from Kolkata, you can make it to Mumbai. So if you want to go from Kolkata to Delhi, yeah, right now, you have to take the detour via Mumbai because there's no straight connection here. And that's how motor learning works. If we want to improve these motor programs, if we want to increase the speed in which they are conducted, we have to ensure that we're building as many connections in between these neurons, in between the brain cells as possible. Because if you have to go from Kolkata to Mumbai first and from Mumbai to Delhi, it will take much longer in comparison to a direct connection from Kolkata to Delhi. And that's what we're doing. If you're conducting a regular motor skill training, using the coordinative abilities, addressing the receptors, your athlete's brain will actually develop this synapses, these connections in between the neurons. And more synapses enable your athletes to conduct or to execute the same motor program in a much faster way. And that, of course, becomes a huge benefit, especially for the speed-related athletes. But we have to do that constantly. And especially with the younger kids, they have a higher plasticity. That means there's a higher chance that they are building the synapses. You can still build the synapses, and developing, because in the beginning it will be very small, very narrow synapses. But over time, if you use them constantly, they're actually getting wider in size. Instead of maybe a small road, you have a highway out of the sudden from Kolkata to Delhi if you use it regularly. So expose your athletes to the motor skills, use them regularly to build the synapses and to strengthen them. And that's one of the reasons why, even if you conduct technique training, we have to repeat it several times, over and over again, until the athlete is able to execute it in a perfect way. Because if you're not doing that, if you're not striving for perfection, if you're not repeating the same technique often and often, over and over again, you will not have a chance to build these connections in between the neurons. And these neurons, of course, they also depend on the quality of the session. Only if you reach a very high quality in your technique training, a proper execution without any mistakes in the advanced model, you will be able to introduce or to establish the right motor program. And the motor program, again, describes just the connection between the neurons, how to go from Kolkata to Delhi. And we want to avoid the detour to Mumbai because it will slow us down. Another aspect when we talk about anatomy is the so-called myelinization. You see the synapses, some of them are relatively narrow, some are a bit stronger. And myelinization just means that we put a myelin layer around these axons or these synapses. And this myelinization already happens during infancy. An increasing number of axons or synapses, that means an increasing number of connections in between these brain cells, requires more myelin sheets. And during the sensitive phases, the sensitive periods or golden ages of motor learning, that's where our body is able to put a lot of these myelin layers around the axons or synapses, that means the connections in between the brain cells. And this, of course, continues through adolescence, that means the later part of the puberty, and also during the early adulthood. So we still have a chance to improve this myelinization, even throughout the life, even with senior citizens, that you can still train certain techniques. Because this myelinization happens throughout the life in the so-called gray matter regions. And gray matter regions means the brain, of course, the brain stem, the cerebral cortex along the spine. So even with an advanced age, you can still learn, acquire new techniques. The only problem is it might take a bit longer. And the advantage of this myelinization is that the speed of the electrical impulse from one neuron to another is heavily increased. You can see that here. The speed here is relatively slow because the electric stimulus is just moving in a waveform from one neuron to the next one. If we have the myelinization, this electrical impulse is not moving in a waveform any longer, it's actually jumping. from one myelin sheet to the next, from here to there, from there to there. So it's not traveling with a constant speed, it's actually accelerated and hopping or jumping from one myelin sheet to the next. Another advantage is you can see that the signal here is getting weaker and weaker as further away we are coming from the initial neuron. And the reason is that this myelinization also works as a kind of insulation. It's the same with the cables you're using maybe to charge your computer right now, your laptop. If you have a very thin cable, the insulation will be quite bad. If you're increasing the cable size, the width of your cable, we're improving the insulation. That means you need lesser energy because more energy will make it from the power outlet to your computer. And that's exactly the same what's happening with this myelinization. Myelinization helps us to increase the speed of our neurons, and it helps us to enhance the quality of our electric stimulus and the commands the brain is providing to the muscles. So myelinization also happens if we repeat the same movement over and over again. And it's highly linked to the quality of your technique, and therefore again, depending on the quality of your motor skills too. So to improve our motor skills, we need to increase the number of synapses, and we have to ensure that we have a proper myelinization. So the question now is how to do that. You've seen some of the exercises already, but in general, what we're trying to do, we want to affect these analyzers or the receptors, and we want to expose them to so-called pressure conditions. If you combine the receptors with these pressure conditions, you're directly improving your motor skills and coordination. You're working on the connections between the neurons, the synapses, and we're working on the improved signal transduction via the so-called myelinization. So, in general, we distinguish between 5 different pressure conditions. The first pressure condition is regarding the situation, that we improve or if we increase the variability during the exercises, and that we increase the complexity of information. If you see Robin Hood shooting an arrow in the midst of a huge fire, of course, that's a lot of pressure, a lot of complexity. You don't necessarily need to burn the track, but you can find other ways to increase the complexity of information for your athletes. Remember this video where the athlete was forced to clap his hands. That's a way to increase variability and the complexity. Another way is to increase the precision. If you see a hummingbird, probably conducting, thousands of wing moves per second, at the same time trying to get the nectar out of the blossom, that's a very precise movement. And that's something we can ask our athletes to do as well. It's of particular importance for the jumpers, for example. They have to hit the board at the right place, not to waste any distance towards the takeoff board. For the relays, for example, to have a very precise baton passing. For the throws, to have a very precise angle. Then we have the complexity of the situation, where you have to conduct simultaneous movements or in succession, maybe with different muscles. I will give you some more examples later. That you combine balance, for example, with some core strengths. Another pressure condition is time, that you do reaction drills or the execution. If you ask 2 athletes to conduct a motor skill or maybe some A skips or B skips against each other, that they are forced to increase the velocity whilst executing. And another pressure condition is the load. Every effect on the central nervous system requires a fully recovered body. So coordination and motor skills have a high impact on the central nervous system. That means we should only affect them in a fully recovered manner. Some senior athletes, like very experienced middle long distance runners, but again, you should not do that before the age of 21, 22, are sometimes trying to conduct technical drills after a long one or even after an intensive training session. Yeah, just to get used to the idea of maintaining with a proper technique, a proper posture in a fatigued way. Yeah, so that's what you can properly use, but again, only for very experienced senior athletes. You should definitely not conduct that with young athletes, because this, again, think about it, will have a negative impact on your motor program. And as long as we don't have a very stable, very advanced motor program, there might be a high chance that we are affecting the motor program, the technique, in a bad way, in a negative way. Because we don't want the athletes to have a slow motor program, we want a very, very fast one. And that's something you can only address if your athlete is fully recovered, because that's the only way for him or her to increase or to ensure there's a high speed whilst executing or performing the exercise. So keep these pressure conditions in mind: situation, precision, complexity, time, and load when we're introducing the next exercises. Yeah, again, we've had these single skips. Now another idea, for example, to do the same skip, because we want to have a huge variety in our training, with a ball. You just dribble a ball. You can ensure, okay, whether our athlete is able to maintain a proper posture, whether the leg movement is 100% correct, because the focus now is not on a hip extension any longer, but for him it's about the ball. Of course, we want to maintain the hip extension, the dorsiflexion, and the vertical alignment, but the athlete's focus is shifting towards the ball here, which makes the whole movement more complex. So we're increasing the pressure. We're getting the athlete out of his comfort zone. You can even make it more difficult if it's getting too easy for the athlete. You do the same with two balls. It's a very easy way to increase the difficulty. You're having a lot of repetitions regarding the hip extension. That means we have a myelization going on, we're building more synapses. Yeah, that strengthens our technical running pattern. At the same time, we're exposing the athlete to some additional complex motor skills, which again will help us to develop even more synapses. And again, as more connections, as more synapses you have in between the neurons, as easier will it be for your athlete to learn a new technique or to reach an advanced stage of technique. Another example, regarding the precision. Here this athlete is walking backwards. So without seeing it, her leg movement has to be very precise over this wobble bar. So you can use a slack line instead. To make it even more complex, you might ask your athletes to close the eyes. Of course, you're not starting with such difficulties. Yeah? You just ask them, maybe together with a partner, to slowly walk over this bar. Once this is getting too easy, you ask them, okay, do it without a partner. If this is getting too easy, you see it's getting too comfortable, you ask them, okay, now we walk backwards. Maybe if she's able to perform it very well, you ask them, okay, walk backwards, keep your hands close to the body and close your eyes. So there's no real limit for you to improve coordination. You can always increase the complexity. And there are a lot of scientific studies indicating if you are approaching balance, maybe at the last part of your warm-up, it will even have a positive impact on the following strength, speed, or technique session. Because if your brain is forced to consider all this information provided by the receptors, it becomes a kind of neuronal warm-up. So by addressing balance in the warm-up of your training session, you're not only affecting, or you're not only showing a physical warm-up, it's also a warm-up of the central nervous system, which will help you to improve the quality and the efficiency of your technique training, your speed training, and the maximum strength training, because they're all related to the central nervous system. Another example you can find here. This is a so-called indoor board. You see the board is fixed on a roll. Yeah, for some athletes, it's already hard to maintain this position. But she now tries to jump off this board, which requires, again, a lot of feedback, a very good sensitivity of the athlete. Yeah, especially if your athlete is dealing with disbalances, if you know that one leg is stronger than the right one, as Galina mentioned it last week, you can use such drills to improve the coordination of the both legs, because you're not able to jump off this board if both legs are not applying exactly the same amount of force in a vertical direction at the same time. And these are drills which not only junior athletes, but even top athletes are using. This girl was participating in the 2017 London World Championships. She's a 100-meter sprinter, 11.22. So another example which you can easily conduct, and we've done this with some of the national campers in Patiala as well, you can easily conduct it all around India. You just need a Swiss ball and probably a soft mat, like a high jump mat or something else. Forget about the text here. Yeah, a few days ago, there was a question, how are we able to increase stiffness of the ankle joint, of the knee joint, of the hip joint? And such exercises are actually not only a way to improve your coordination, but they also help you to improve your stiffness. If you see the landing on the ball, you need a lot of isometric strength. That means the athlete is freezing in the situation to balance the ball movement. And of course, you just start jumping on the ball. If the athletes are able to perform this well, you probably pass them a medicine ball. If this is getting too easy, you ask them to catch 2 tennis balls. Yeah, but you can see a lot of isometric strength here, which helps us to stabilize the ball lower extremities. You can even combine it with some squats and some outtakes. It's not always working, but the risk of injuries is very, very little here, because again, the central nervous system is highly activated and very easily able to adapt to the load. Another form of coordination, when you combine it with speed training. Here in this case, you're not able to listen to the sound now, but you see we have 4 different colors or 3 different colors of cones. We have red, yellow, and green. And now the athlete is asked to follow a specific order. Yeah, in this case, it was yellow, red, green, followed by a clap, which was the starting signal for the athlete. Yeah, so this is a very simple way. Of course, you can use even more colors if you want to. So the next step would be, because we want to make the athlete think a bit, and we want to combine a mental development as well as a coordinative development. So in addition to calling these cones yellow, red, and green, you might call them beach, fire, and forest. Yeah, and then you go for combination. You say yellow, fire, green. So the athlete has to process the information. He has to think about it. Okay, what was fire again? Yeah, what was forest? If this is happening well, you can even add numbers. If you say, okay, the yellow cone is number 1, red is 2, green becomes 3. So it's green, 3, and forest. Here we have red, fire, and 2. And we have beach, 1, and yellow. And you can just go for a mixture. Yeah, so there are no limits again to the complexity of these exercises. And it's a very fun way, actually, especially for general preparation or even the beginning of special preparation, to make your training more complex, more interesting, to engage the athletes not only in conducting the drills, but also in thinking or processing the information, because that's the best way to enhance your technique. Yeah. Something else, I think you all know about this, and easily do it at the beach to avoid injuries. Here the athlete is asked to close his eyes, to turn around, and afterwards the coach is calling, so you cannot see that here, the color of the cone again. So there was also yellow, green, red. So he has to turn around 10 times around the cone. then the coach is giving a signal regarding the color, and the athlete's being completely distracted here, still has to figure out where is the right cone. Yeah, especially for team sports, that makes a lot of sense. But again, it's also something we can easily use in the general preparation with our athletes. It might make sense, for example, for the rotational athletes, rotational shot putters, rotational discus throwers or hammer throwers, to improve the body's ability to orientate itself during the rotational movement in the ring. You try it yourself, be a bit careful, ensure you have enough space. So then the question we have to ask ourselves, how is coordination connected to growth or puberty? Yeah, we mentioned already that we have different developmental ages, especially regarding the mental development, and that there are sensitive periods of optimal trainability, the golden ages of motor learning. We can improve our technique. We are able to enhance this coordination throughout the life, and that's something we need to do. Yeah, even with senior athletes, we have to regularly affect coordination because it will help us. But we have certain phases in our life where the body shows a high plasticity. That means a high potential to adjust to these loads. Yeah, and this is according to the high plasticity of the motor cortex. Again, especially the gray matters in our brain. And this requires repetitions of same or similar exercises several times to stabilize the movement patterns. Yeah, especially with the young kids, 5 to 8 years old, if you are already able to introduce a basic takeoff or a basic overhead throw, even with the young kids, it will be of huge support when it comes to the later stages. It does not mean that we are conducting an athletics training. That's something we definitely should not do. Yeah, at this stage, it's only about fun. But if you're exposing the kids to throwing maybe different balls, towels, whatever, they already establish a basic movement pattern for the throws. If you ask them to perform certain jumping exercises, not with the purpose of training it, not thinking about plyometrics, but just exposing them to different perceptions regarding single leg, double leg, bounding. Yeah, it will already help to develop movement patterns. If you find ways to conduct a lot of frequency drills at this age, it will definitely help you to increase the frequency you need at a later specialization high performance stage. So at these ages, maybe even a bit later until the age of 10, 11, you have to address all abilities, yeah, but we need to focus on reaction, frequency, and balance. Because of all of the coordinative abilities, these three are most important for athletes regarding the long-term development. And again, use simple exercises in the beginning. We don't want to overstress the athletes, and once they're performing well, we slowly increase the pressure, especially with regards to time. That means they have to conduct them in a faster, a quicker way, or with higher frequency. Yeah, use the opportunity of these sensitive phases of motor learning. Expose your kids, especially the young athletes, not only from the age of 5 to 8, but even later from the age of 10 to 11, to a lot of coordinative abilities, because they will help you develop better athletes. So once puberty starts, we have to consider a few aspects as well. We've already mentioned with the onset of puberty, usually the vertical height is increasing rapidly. And this will have a huge impact on our coordination, on our technique. Because now all of a sudden, the position of our body center of mass is shifting. Yeah, the legs are getting longer. It means the body center of mass is increasing. The mass of the head, for example, is reduced in comparison to younger ages. Because of the change in the limb lengths, the arms and the legs, and also of the trunk, we are using different angles. Yeah, balance will be even harder to reach. So these coordinative abilities which we've trained before puberty will be negatively affected during growth, especially with the onset of the growth spurt. And that means once your athletes are reaching puberty, we have to focus on stabilizing known exercises of movement patterns. It does not really make sense to teach new techniques when your athletes are growing massively at the same time. Yeah, because the whole system will be completely confused. With your peak height velocity, when you're growing 8, 9, 10 centimeters a year, of course, this is information provided by the receptors, like the muscle tendon organs, the sense of balance. This information will be affected as well because it's harder for the athlete to maintain balance. The way the muscles and the joints are working together is completely changing. So all the information provided by the receptors to the brain will be adjusted as well. And therefore, it's more important during puberty to establish previously known exercises or techniques. Yeah, try not to teach new technique or a lot of new techniques at this phase. It's more important to stabilize what your athletes have already acquired. And so limit the amount of new exercises. And before or during adolescence, at the end of puberties, boys often show a higher sensitivity or learning aptitude for new movements. So with girls, it's important that we reach a relatively high technical level already at the beginning of pubescence, before they start the growth spurt. With boys, it's often a bit easier, and I think some of you might have made this experience. With boys, it's often a bit easier to teach new movements at the end of adolescence. That means when they reach usually their age around 15, 16. So for girls, they might need a slightly longer time, which should not be an excuse. Of course, you still have to adjust it. So there is another way to conduct coordination drills. You can easily combine it with core strength, for example. We mentioned already that core strength becomes essential to prepare your body for a later strength training or maximum strength training. And when we're talking about core strength, we usually have different stages of developing the core strength. Similar to coordination, we always want to get our athletes out of their comfort zone. And we need to constantly challenge them by affecting core. And coordination here becomes a helpful contributor. Because if we increase the coordinative aspects of our core exercises, we will also make them more intense. And there is a trend in coordination training that it's not about how long are you able to maintain a plank. There are people who are able to stay in a plank position for more than 4 hours. But this does not really help our athletes. Just maintaining in a plank, we usually say we should be able to do so for 3 minutes at least. But if you're able to reach these 3 minutes, it does not necessarily make sense to maintain and to stay there for 10, 15 minutes. So we have to find for other ways to intensify these exercises. And coordination can help you here. If you see a normal plank, the first stage by developing core strength is always to reach a proper position. And you can see one of our national sprinters, Daneshwari, here. Proper position means we have a neutral spine, neutral pelvis position. The belly button is in, the legs are fully extended, the toes could be a bit more dorsiflexed here. And then the second stage is to maintain in this position. The third stage then, after reaching the correct position, after being able to maintain it, we try to destabilize the system. We're increasing the element of coordination. And we're doing so, for example, by lifting one hand. Remember, by lifting one hand, we are destabilizing the system because the base of support is reduced. If you see this movement here, the base of support is from the left arm to the left foot, to the right elbow and back. So we have a huge square, almost covering the whole mat. If you see this movement now on the right side, and we have here, for example, now the right arm has been lifted. So the weight of support is reduced by almost 50% because now the weight of support only goes from your left elbow to the left foot, to the right foot, and back to the left elbow. Yeah, so we're almost decreasing our base of support by 50%, which makes the whole movement more complex and harder to execute. So by increasing or decreasing the base of support, we're increasing the coordination and we're making our core work more intense. The same, if you see the glute thrust here, yeah, the athlete is easily able to extend the hip. And by the way, by using the glute thrust or even the hip thrust, always ensure that your athletes are lifting the toes, because otherwise you will have a higher activation of the quadriceps. And that's not what we want to do. We want to activate the glutes and the hamstrings. So if only the heel is in contact with the ground, if you're lifting your toes, we can shift the activation towards the so-called posterior chain. Yeah, but here we have a double leg movement, and we can simply intensify it by lifting one leg, decreasing the base of support, and we're making this a bit more intense, of course, because now only one leg has to raise the hip. But this is another way to make your core strength more effective. Here, that's another example of a young sprinter. He's doing a plank with a partner having his legs, and randomly the partner is dropping one leg. The athlete does not know which leg is going to be dropped. So they have to prepare the body, they have to activate the hip, yeah, the glutes to extend the hip flexor to stabilize. This is a dorsiflexion. And randomly, the partner is simply dropping one leg, yeah, which is a variation of the plank, but it makes the movement more intense. And this is also coordination. We need a lot of stability, but at the same time, we also focusing on the reaction. Yeah, the athlete has to react to the movement, and there's a lot of information provided by the receptors. Here, of course, regarding the skin, yeah, which hand is in contact. Regarding the balance, how do I counterbalance the movement without dropping my hip? How do I do that without avoiding a twisting of the hip, for example? So very simple ways to combine core strength and coordination. And I leave it up to you to come up with more examples. So here we see our sprinter again. We're trying to combine some warm-up for sprint drills regarding the posture. This is a 4 kg medicine ball, and she's staying on a very unstable balance pad. Of course, by conducting such exercise, we have to avoid any lateral movement of the knee. But this exercise provides a lot of kinesthetical feedback, yeah, whilst performing a hip extension, which will help us with the balance during a single leg stance phase, as we have it in the sprints and the jumps, as well as the hip extension and the posture of our body. Okay. Yeah, in addition to combining strength and core and coordination, there's also a relatively modern idea of combining strength training and coordination. Next week, we will go a bit more into the detail regarding strength training for athletes, especially in the developmental stages. But coordination actually helps you to increase the specificity of your exercises. And again, we're following the same principles. Your strength exercises become more specific if you're conducting them in a fast way in comparison to a slow way. Yeah, if you're covering specific movements rather than general movements, that means more single leg movements. Yeah, we're often conducting or having squats, cleans, and these are usually double leg movements. But this is not the kind of strength we actually apply in a competition, like a triple jump. Yeah, single leg movements are much closer to the eventual technique in comparison to double leg movements. So instead of conducting a clean, with 2 legs on the ground, you might consider conducting the clean and the jerk just with 1 leg. You see a slow motion here of one of our triple jumpers. It's not necessarily about the heavy weights. It's also how are you able to move these weights. Yeah, and you see a very quick movement, full body extension, full hip extension, dorsiflexion, yeah, a very quick free leg. So that's exactly what we're looking for in the triple jumps, but in most of the other events as well. Yeah, and one other point or one additional point to make your strength movements more specific is to use multi-joint movements, as you can see here, in comparison to isolated or single joint movements. So coordination, again, helps you to get your athletes out of your comfort zone and to make the movements regarding core strengths and strengths more specific. But to do so, you need a very strong base of general coordinative abilities or motor skills. Yeah, a strong fundament which we have to develop throughout an athlete's career with sensitive phases in the beginning. So practical conclusions of the last minutes: start to train or to affect all coordinative abilities as early as possible, focusing on reaction, rhythm, and balance at the younger kids, but emphasizing on it. We have to affect all of them using the pressure conditions, but just emphasize a bit on the 3 I just mentioned. Coordination then has to precede strength and conditioning regarding the long-term athlete's development. We have to make use of this high plasticity of the gray matter of the brain, yeah, because only until adolescence, that means probably 15, 16, we actually have a very high chance to improve the motor patterns for speed, for example. You can still adjust it afterwards, but not to such a huge extent. So work on coordination, on frequency, on pure speed below the duration of 6-7 seconds with athletes until the age of 15, 16. Afterwards, we can easily focus a bit more on the conditioning, but before that, we need to establish a strong fundament of motor skills. We need to increase the variety in our training. We constantly have to look for new loads and new challenges, get the athletes out of their comfort zone, and increase the pressure conditions. Always ensure your athletes are well recovered when affecting the coordinative abilities, and focus on the quality of the movement. Avoid mistake whilst conducting this exercise. That applies to technique drills as well. Okay, that's it for today. Yeah, maybe there are some questions. Thanks for listening. I hope it gave you a certain idea of how to make your training more interesting, because this will also not only help you with the development of your abilities, but at the same time, it makes your training more fun. And that's something we have to definitely consider as well.
Rajmohan, can you come out with the questions?
Good morning, sir. Are you able to hear me, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Sir, what is the specific coordinating exercises for jumps? If you can ask clear that.
Sorry, now I didn't understand you.
What is the specific coordinating exercise for jumps events?
Yeah, I don't want to give like a specific exercise now. Of course, we will have another session on plyometrics next week, I think. But be creative here as a coach. Yeah, when we're talking about the development of motor skills, it's really up to you. Think about what is the eventual technique looking like. What are the abilities you need in the jumps? It's the same: frequency, rhythm, and balance. Yeah, that's why most of the jumpers are conducting a lot of hurdle training as well, because hurdling is a perfect way to develop these abilities. But it's up to you to become creative here. Yeah, think about what are the exercises you can use, how are they able to contribute to your training.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So next is there should be different ways of doing core exercises for preparatory period, competition period.
Oh, sorry. One second. Here's a question: which period is the best for the developing coordination?
Yeah.
And I think, again, yeah, in every season we're starting with general aspects, and of course these general aspects offer you a huge chance to develop these motor skills or coordinative abilities as well. When we're talking about the long-term development, you have to expose the athletes to these coordinative abilities at younger ages, I would say every single day, at least 4 or 5 times a week. You have to widen or to increase the number of connections, of synapses, of axons, and to work on this myelinization. With the senior athletes, you should actually include it regularly in your training as well, maybe not to such a huge extent, but use it during the warm-up. Whenever you're affecting speed, strength, or technique, the efficiency of your session will be increased if you just do maybe 4 or 5 minutes of this motor skill training before the main session. But of course, if you want to develop the skills themselves, I would rather do it in general preparation extensively, and when you're coming closer to the competitions, you're still affecting it, but not to such an extent. Maybe instead of 2 or 3 times a week, you're only doing it once or twice, for example, and maybe a bit shorter.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
very clearly now. Thank you.
Which one will be the best way to improve coordination in endurance runners? Coordination drills or isometric coordination drills, as endurance runners feels difficult to do isometric coordination drills after they feel tired.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful here not to mistake forms of muscle activation and coordination. Yeah? When you're saying isometric, it means there's no change in length. That might apply to balance work, for example. But you're very right, you should not conduct this coordinative training in a fatigued way. So always do it probably before you start a session. Yeah, avoid, especially with the athletes below the age of 20, 21, you should definitely avoid a situation where your athletes are fatigued and you are affecting the coordination. But again, it will have a negative impact on your motor program. That's something we want to avoid.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is general question, sir. Can you please guide which exercises are better to toddlers for improving their coordination? This is for toddlers.
Yeah, I think with young kids, with babies, you have to be, there actually no real challenge. You have to understand, of course, are they already able to identify the objects you're using? Yeah, a lot of parents are using balls, for example. You might start with a very lightweight, bigger ball, or even a balloon full of air, just to get them exposed to such things. Different forms. I think there are like thousands of different games on the market right now which you can use, which you can pass to your kids, which are safe. Avoid which the kids can swallow, but you expose them to as many different loads as possible. This will definitely help you with the development of your brain, and that's an interesting aspect. If you have higher coordinative abilities, it will also help you with picking up educational aspects, learning languages, mathematics, whatever. So sports is actually a very, very good contributor to an education system, especially athletics, because we are exposing our kids to a huge base, to a huge variety, and as wide as this variety is, as easier will it be for your kid to pick up things at school as well.
Thank you, sir. Sir, can you explain once more about the puberty period? What type of coordinative abilities or core exercises can be given? One, they are having a doubt about the puberty period, what you mentioned in the slides.
Puberty, we have usually 2 main phases. That's the pubescence in the beginning, which often starts, okay, that we discussed for the girls a bit earlier, for the boys a bit later. And we have the adolescence at the end. The biggest problem is that during puberty, your body is growing, often 8, 9, 10 centimeters within a year. Yeah, and this will have a massive impact on your coordination, because out of the sudden your center of gravity has a slightly higher position. At the same time, your legs are getting longer, your arms are getting longer, and this will impact the so-called lever arms. Yeah, the center of gravity of your legs will be further away from the trunk, for example. And that means we have to refigure our movement patterns. And we have to reteach exercise. If you've been able to teach a takeoff to a 12-year-old kid, yeah, and then you see, okay, the boy or the girl is coming into puberty, they're starting to grow, it makes no sense to go ahead and focus on the flight phase or the landing. Yeah, you have to ensure that they're able to properly execute the takeoff. For you, it might be the same, but for the body or for the brain, the central nervous system, the whole situation is changing because of the height growth. And so we have to reteach them. And what I mentioned regarding core, you have to start core training already a bit earlier. You should start training the core from the age of 10, 11 to stabilize your body during this growth spurt. Yeah, because this will also contribute to the coordination, and it will help you to avoid injuries, to have a better feeling for the body. And you can easily combine core strength and coordination just by destabilizing the system. Now remember, we have 3 initial stages of core strength development. Just the first one, reach a physiologically proper position. Second, be able to maintain in this position. And once you are able to do so, we are destabilizing the system. Yeah, by raising a leg, by raising a hand, by adding some movements, whatever. But throughout an athlete's career, we have to affect core and the coordination as well.
Thank you, sir. So next doubt is, how many days we can do coordination drills in a week for kids to the beginners, for the beginners?
Yeah, I would do it every single training session.
Yep. Okay. So one more doubt is that, sir, if any athlete's coordination / technique falls during the elite level,
decide whether we want to do it or not.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. If any athlete's coordination / technique falls during the elite level, then how can we improve or manage it again?
Yeah, what I mentioned, the same principles I've introduced also apply to elite athletes. And I know that in India, a lot of coaches are saying it makes no sense to address the technique after the age of 20, 21. This is actually not true. You can teach techniques throughout your life. And even a 25-year-old athlete, to a certain extent, will be able to improve the technique if it's necessary. It's just a bit harder. You need to be patient. Yeah, and for the coaches, it's very important that you point out the necessary things over and over again. If you're working with elite athletes, you will see there are certain variations in their technique. Yeah, the long jump technique of Sri Shankar looks different than the long jump technique of the world record holder, Mike Toll or Carl Lewis. Yeah, but with every technique, we have certain or so-called key phases, key aspects, and they are the same. Yeah, it's about the takeoff position, how much horizontal, how much vertical velocity you have. Yeah, what do you have to do? And as coaches, we have to work around these key factors, and you constantly need to improve them. In the high jump, for example, yeah, we have key positions. For example, when there are a lot of variations, you can see difficulties or differences in the swing leg, even in how the athletes are clearing the bar. But if you compare high jumpers from all around the world, when they are touching down with the jumping foot, yeah, it looks the same. The incline angle, the backward lean is almost the same. Every high jumper all around the world, when they are leaving the ground at takeoff, it's exactly the same situation, the same position. So we have to figure out what are these key positions for our events, and then we have to constantly develop our athletes towards these key positions. And I guarantee you, you can definitely improve the technique even of a 30-year-old jumper or thrower if you're patient as a coach, if you're using the right exercise. Because only with a decent technique and a proper coordinative level, they will be able to make use of their full physical potential. If you are just doing strength training, but you're not affecting speed or technique and coordination, yeah, you will probably only be able to apply 90% of your strengths. But that's something I will also introduce during the strength training discussion we will have within the next week.
Thank you, sir. So next question is regarding the recovery process of the central nervous system. After doing a coordinated training session, how much recovery we should give for the athlete to recover faster if the CNS is activated more? It's regarding the microcycle plan.
Yeah, usually for the central nervous system, we say you need at least 48, sometimes up to 72 hours of recovery. Yeah, that's the reason why even top athletes, they're not conducting more than 2 maximum speed sessions in a week. And that includes speed endurance, by the way, as well. For coordination, it's a bit different. You have to understand what is the purpose of your coordinative exercises. If you really want to go for intensive session, 20 minutes of different motor skills, I would definitely give the athletes 3 days before you conduct the next session like this. If you focus on particular aspects, yeah, let's say you have a hurdler and you want to develop the rhythm, it's the same. You give them 72 hours until you conduct the next session where you focus on rhythm. But in the meantime, yeah, you can still affect other things. You can do a lot of ankle joint stability, which always includes balance. You can work on your hand-eye coordination. You can work on, yeah, for example, this Swiss ball jumps. And if you're not focusing on coordinative abilities, if you just use it maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes as a part of your warm-up, I think you can immediately go ahead on the next day. So it's always what we say, the dose makes a poison. If you're only conducting it for 4 or 5 minutes as a kind of warm-up, there's no problem to have a similar session the next day again. If you focus on it, if you have a higher volume, a higher intensity, yeah, if developing your coordinative abilities, if this is the main objective of your training session, then you should give them at least 48 up to 72 hours. Again, you should affect it on a daily basis. Just look for different weights, different motor patterns. And don't conduct rhythm on Monday and rhythm on Tuesday. Focus on rhythm on Monday, balance on Tuesday, hand-eye coordination on Wednesday, and then you start again with the same pattern, for example, on Thursday.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this one is that the question is that regarding the body posture position, that its age effects, means in the beginners also body posture has to be taught in a proper manner, or what it affects, their effects of body posture in the early age as well as in the elite level.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. If you ask, let's say, an 8-year-old kid to run as fast as possible, if you see young kids chasing each other, yeah, on the street, whatever, in athletics, in some ball games, it's very interesting to observe that these kids often show a much better running technique than senior athletes, because they are not spoiled in a certain way. Yeah, if you're, as a senior athlete, if you're, I don't know, attending class at university, if you're spending a lot of time sitting, you develop certain disbalances. That there is a disbalance regarding the muscle strength, that some muscles are a bit tighter than others, maybe that you've been exposed to a wrong technical model. So the technical principles apply to all athletes, whether they're 8 years old or 15 years old or 50. But interestingly, with these young kids who still have a pure movement, you can see that they have a much better technique in comparison to junior athletes, for example. So often what coaches do, actually, maybe not on purpose, but based on their training, the athlete is developing in the wrong technical direction. That's something we have to avoid.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Over to Radha, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walker. It was a great session otherwise. regarding coordination. Once again, thank you very much. I think Miss Anju George is here with us. So I request her feedback on this session because she was with us all the days till from the day it started. So I request Anju to give some feedback on this SAI AFI Coaches Development Program which started on 16th.
Can you hear me? Good morning.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Herman, Adil sir, Radhakrishnan sir, for conducting this course for us, because even it's difficult time, we can utilize this time for learning new things. I was attending the entire session throughout the days, and it was very informative. Even today's session regarding coordination. Actually, this is really important, and it's playing a big role in our sporting career. Actually, today's session, it was very informative and interesting. Actually, I can say that coordination, actually, it's playing a major role in learning technique, especially for jumpers, for throwers, even for sprinters. Actually, the use of the body together and smoothly and efficiently. That is, I think, the coordination is all about. Actually, I think and I believe we need to teach our brain, our neurosystem, and our together. Actually, if we want to perform in a bigger stage, we need to teach our brain sometimes the wrong and the proper technique, because we need to know, our neurosystem should know what is wrong and what is correct. So in our early training session, I used to do both. Even we developed a technique sometimes. Bobby, even after closing his eyes, hearing he could tell us how much I can jump, or he could predict how far I can jump. So that neuromuscular coordination, or that technique also, we need a good coach need to develop. And actually, if we need to master in our technique, our coordination should be proper, and we need to develop a proper coordination in early stages, actually. And we need to execute that technique even in our high pressure situation also. If we are going for a world championship or
Anju, I think your internet is having some problem.
all in our, so can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, now it's clear.
Okay. And as he rightly said, we need to learn proper technique, and if it's needed, we need to correct it every year, because the technique in the every year developing new technique, and we need to cope up with that. So we need to learn. Every year we need to be ready for changing our techniques. So, and I think and I believe a coach should get 100% belief from their words before starting training. Then only one athlete can deliver his best, because the belief in a coach, that's very important. And he need to be 100% clarity on his training also. So I think it was a really wonderful session, and thank you, Herman, once again. I want to thank you, FA, and thank you, Sai. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miss Anju Bobby George. Now we are winding the session of the day, and the next session on tomorrow will be very interesting, hurdling and hurdle drills by Mr. James, the head coach of the High Performance Training Center at Odisha. So thank you all. Thank you to our Chief National Coach Bahadur Singh ji. He is also available with us. I think President has left, so he had another meeting. So bye till tomorrow morning 10 a.m. Thank you very much. And now I request Mr. Kamal Ali to take over.
എന്നോട് പെട്ടെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. എന്റെ അമ്മച്ചി